Okay, hello Web Labbers. We'll be getting started now. And welcome to day 3 of Web Lab. Who's excited? That's great, thanks. So today we'll again be talking about React because it's such an important part of modern web development. And thanks to Quan, Theo, and Felina for the great lectures on React, JavaScript, and prototyping in Figma yesterday. So yeah, to start us off today, we'll be creating part of Catbook in React. And I want to again point out some important links. So because this is a workshop and you'll be following along, open up the questions document, weblab.is/questions for any sort of questions that you have. You can also open up the help queue at weblab.is/queue. And we'll also have people just walking around to help you out with anything. For questions after class, you should open up Piazza. If you haven't joined already, you should, weblab.is/Piazza. And you can also see the slides for all lectures, including this one, at weblab.mit.edu/schedule and scroll down to the current day. Okay, we'll get started. So in React, we say that to create any sort of website, we treat it as a single very large component that we call the app component. And we can break it down into however many smaller components we want or we need. And so we have a giant component called the app component, and your website is literally just the app component. And we can define it in terms of the smaller components. So if we take a look at the Instagram page as an example, we can divide our main app into a smaller navbar component, a feed component, and a sidebar component. And each of these components can in turn be divided into even smaller components. So if we take what was the feed component, we know that it's basically just a bunch, like thousands, it's literally an infinite scroll of posts, right? And so we have hundreds or thousands of post components as part of the feed component. For the sidebar component, we also know that we can divide it up into, for example, a story section subcomponent and a suggestion subcomponent. And the point of doing this is that we can get chunks of code that are easy to implement and that we can reuse wherever we need to do it. And so that's why we say that React apps are components of components. We also have this important concept in React called a prop. Props are short for properties. And as we discussed yesterday, they are inputs to a component. A lot of time we want to be able to customize a component. So for example, if we look at the posts, we know that each post has unique comments, probably has some sort of feature like a like button. So we know that there's a unique like count. And we don't want to create a different post component for every single post that's out there, right? We want to use a single post component that we can adapt to every single post. And so whatever inputs we want to give to a post, that's what we would call a prop. And this just streamlines things for us to use. It's sort of like inputs to a function. In addition to props, another important concept is that of a state. Every component can have its own internal variables that we can update. And sometimes you want to store information inside of a component. A state is how you're going to do that. Oh, my bad. Let me share my screen on Zoom. Okay, and this is the syntax for creating a state variable. We're going to come back to this later. In this particular example, we can, for example, create a state that's status and show whether the user is busy or not. We can create a state called is online and give it a Boolean, like a true or false, whether the user is online or not. And a way to represent apps is to use what's called a component tree. And like every other website, we have this big component called app that we can further subdivide into its smaller components. So for example, we could have a first tier of components that's just named, a component, another component, a fourth component. And we can in turn have another lower tier of components like a fifth component and a sixth component. We write props along the arrows because props are passed from a parent component to a child component. So in this example, we have a component called another component. And there are certain properties, for example, the name Joe or the number of cats 4 that we want to pass to its child component called a fifth component. And we can also see that we have states included in this component tree where states are written within the box of the component. And that's because states are internal and within a component. So we can have props along the arrows and states within components. So we can go ahead and make a component tree for the Instagram example that we've been talking about. So as we've been over already, we have this big app component. And then we want to further subdivide this into other components. So what makes sense is a navbar component, a feed component, a sidebar component, and then the feed component can in turn is in turn composed of a bunch of smaller post components. And you can see here that you can call in components just very similar to how you would return HTML code. And so there's a navbar component, a feed component, and a sidebar component that composes this app component. You can see that in this sidebar component, we have a smaller story section component. We also have a suggestion component, and we can also return these in their own HTML tags. And then we can also divide the navbar into a search bar and nav buttons. You can also notice that there's an image here for the Instagram logo, because this is just HTML code. So what you learned previously in previous days would also apply here, and you can insert images however you want. And then finally in the feed, we know that we have a ton of posts, so that's just what it looks like. We would return a bunch of posts. And we can define posts in their own file. It might look something like this. We define them as a constant. You take in a prop or multiple props as inputs. You can do whatever sort of JavaScript stuff that you want to, and then return HTML code that you'll be displaying. And maybe let's say that we take in a prop like an image, and this sort of image like this one. And we also return maybe something like a like button and also a state where we have 250 likes. Instead of hard coding 250 likes, because we know that posts can have a dynamic range of likes, and we probably also want some sort of interactive feature where we click the like button and we get an increase in the number of likes, we can create a state variable like this. And we initialize the state variable to 0 because initially there are 0 likes. And now we've stored the number of likes as a state variable instead of hard coding a single number. And if we want, we can also add something called onClick. We can add this. And so we have a responsive web page where if we click on this image, we can trigger the add like function and increase the number of likes by 1. So there are a lot of possibilities with what you can do. You can code components however you want, and it really depends on what you want your component to do. To recap that intro, the fundamental principle of React is that we are using components that we can break down very easily and also ideally implement very easily. We can represent components as HTML code. We can represent them as other other React components, and we can mix and match them together. Components can receive and maintain their own information. So if they get information, that's a prop. If they have information within them, that's what we call a state. And all of this is in the WebLab guide that we also mentioned yesterday, weblab.is/react-guide-1. And you can open this up because this will probably be helpful for you during the workshop. Okay, so what do we want to do today? You might remember that we created a Catbook with HTML and CSS on day 1. And if you want to go to this website here, weblab.is/profile, you can see what we're going to do today. And I might as well click on the link and just show you guys. So remember that this section and this section looks sort of familiar. The image has been swapped. It was a turtle, and now it's just a corgi. And we also have this counter called cat happiness here. And it has a function in that if you were to click on this image of a corgi, you actually have an increase in this cat happiness parameter, let's say. And I'll just mention that if you're sort of wondering, like, why do we call it cat happiness instead of like dog cat happiness or like turtle happiness? I'll just say that like for future workshops, it sort of helps to just keep our variable names the same. But yeah, so today we're going to make this sort of website where you click on something and you get some sort of response. And I hope that's clear, and I hope that everyone is going to be excited about this. So to get started, let's all open VS Code and also open Terminal. And so I'm going to just walk through along with this. So open up Visual Studio Code. You should have installed this on Monday. If you have any sort of problems, please raise your hand or go to the help doc or help queue, and we'll have people coming around to help. So once we open Visual Studio Code, let's first open up Terminal. So if you see this menu bar up at the top, you can see that there's a button here that says Terminal. Click on it, or this is for Macs. I think it should be similar-ish for PCs. And then click on New Terminal. Is everybody following along? Now let's follow the slides, and the slides say to check what version of Node you have. So you should have installed Node as part of homework 1, and you will need it as part of this workshop. So type node-v, and you should see the most recent version of Node is 18.13.0. If you have anything like 18.12.1, this workshop should work as well. So just making sure that everyone has Node on their computer and is ready to go. Again, if you don't have Node right now, please raise your hand and someone will come and help you. Okay, we're all good. Now let's open the Catbook React folder in VS Code. So if you remember, we cloned the Catbook React folder from GitHub on day 1. Now we're going to click on File. We're going to click on Open Folder. And we're going to navigate to the Catbook React folder and click Open. It should be pretty simple. And we are all good with that. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And you can see that. So I'm going to open terminal again, actually. You don't need to do that. You can see there's a button here. And if you hover over it, it's going to say split terminal. So click on that split terminal button, and then we're going to have 2 terminals open. And this will come in handy later on. Now let's run the commands up on the slides. So first we're going to run git fetch. And what git fetch should do is it should update your version of Catbook React with the version that's live on GitHub right now. So if there were any sort of updates since you last cloned or fetched this repo, you want to make sure you get those updates. Then you're going to type git space reset space dash hard to delete any sort of changes that you've made. You're going to do git space checkout space w2 starter to use the workshop 2 branch that we're going to be using today. And then you're going to run npm space install to install a bunch of packages and dependencies that you'll be using today. So I'm going to just keep this up on the screen for a minute, and then I'm going to go ahead and run these commands as well. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay. Okay, so run the following 4 commands in your terminal window. And could we just have a quick thumbs up when you're good? Okay, that's good. I'm starting to see some thumbs up here. I'll give it another 10 seconds. Oh, and the npm install command should take a minute or so. That's normal. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and run these commands. Okay, so we're all ready to get started with the workshop, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a component tree for this Catbook that we'll be making today. So again, unsurprisingly, you have this very big app component at the highest tier, and then you have subcomponents within it, right? So in this case, we might say that it makes sense to divide things into a navbar component and a profile component. And then under the profile component, we also have another component, third component, that we'll call cat happiness. And the reason we're going to make this its own component is because it has a unique functionality. And so we might as well make it its own component. But I also just want to point out that there's not always a right answer for when you make something its own component or when you don't make something its own component. Sometimes it's more of a stylistic thing and sort of like a design decision. So that's what we're going to do. And now we're going to go back to Visual Studio Code. And we're going to run npm space run space hotloader in one of the terminal windows that you have open. So you have 2 terminal windows. You can just run that command in the first one. npm space run space hotloader. And go ahead and run that. And again, I'll be asking for a quick thumbs up. This should be pretty instantaneous. Are we good with this command? Is it running? Do we have any sort of errors? If we have an error, please raise your hand and we'll have someone come and help you. There's someone. I'll give it 10 more seconds. So what this command does is it runs a plugin called React Hotloader. And Hotloader has this functionality where, if you remember in the past, when we make a change to a website, we have to drag the index.html file over to a browser. and then reload that file every single time we make a change, right? What hot loader does is it lets us create a React website where we can open it up in a browser and not have to constantly reload the website. And so this command will not finish running. It's going to keep running in this terminal window because it's constantly sending live updates to a local host whenever we make changes to any sort of code. If you scroll up a little bit, you can see that the command that's actually being run is this one here. And you see that there's a mention of a port 5050 here. So actually, let's go ahead and open up a browser. And let's open up localhost :5050. And you can see a website here. And all the code for this website is the code that you have here in VS Code. And what I've been saying about hot loader is if you change anything, so if I change this title here, and I make it like just test, and I save the page, oh, that's not being displayed yet, so that's not a good example. Or no, did I not do git checkout? I think it should be all in client. Oh, yeah, thanks. Okay, yeah, so actually let's take a look at what we have here, right? So you have a bunch of files here that you can basically just ignore. We won't be touching them in today's workshop. You have a client folder here that you can click on to open up. You have this folder for distribution. You have a src folder, source. And in your source folder, you have a bunch of different files here. So for example, we have app.js here. And if you click on it and open it up, you can see something that maybe sort of looks similar to what you've seen in some of the slide decks earlier. So first off, there's sort of a change here is that you have to import React, and you also have to import whatever component you're using here. So for example, we have a navbar component, and then we also call the navbar component down here. And you might be wondering where navbar and profile are being defined because you need to do that somewhere. And if you guess that it's also in this folder, you're correct. So if you open up pages or modules, you can see JavaScript and CSS files for navbar and for profile. And just to give you an example of what hot loader does, if I were to modify this text here, which you can see right here to just like test, and I save the file, that's important, and I go over here, you can see that hot loader has already compiled this change, and it's displaying this. But it means that we cannot use this terminal for any other commands. So moving forward, we'll be using this terminal window. And yeah, why don't you go ahead and modify this section to just put your name there. Right now, we can see that the navbar is basically totally empty or non-existent, right? There's literally nothing here. There's no navbar on the website. And if we go over to the navbar file, which is under client source components modules, we can see that we're returning null. So we don't have any navbar right now yet. And we want to populate the navbar with something similar to what we had in workshop 0 on Monday. Oh, actually, okay, some important things that I do want to point out are, as mentioned in the lectures yesterday, when we use React, instead of using class, we use class name like this. And we also commonly name our CSS styles, the component name, and then dash the style name. This is not necessary. This is not essential per se to use React, but it's something that we commonly use to keep our something that we commonly do to keep our code organized. You might also notice actually that in this profile page, we have up here code for our profile avatar. That's basically just our profile picture here. We have our profile name. That's this one. We have our horizontal line here. That's HR. And then we have a flex container with two subsections. One that's just about me, and the other that's my favorite type of cat. And you might say that this is not necessarily 100% in the spirit of React, because we might say that, for example, we could subdivide this into its own component and this into its own component, right? But this is just what the workshop code is right now, and we'll leave it like that. And also, as a handy thing, if we want to navigate across the different files that we have, we can use Command P and then type whatever sort of file, right? So if we want to go to the app file, we can just do Command P. And we have this handy search tool that shows up, type app, enter, and now you open up app. Okay, but now let's talk about the nav bar. So we have previously implemented a nav bar on Monday with just HTML, and we've also applied some CSS stylings to it. But right now we don't have a nav bar. So why don't I give you all a couple minutes to go to your navbar.js file. And there's a hint here that you should probably be modifying this section and write some code here that gives you a nav bar. So I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to do that, okay? Think about how you're going to add a nav bar. Oh, and the instructions also say that you can feel free to add your own twist. So it doesn't need to be this blue nav bar with the white text Catbook. You can go a little crazy with it. And raise your hand if you want help. Oh, we have a hand raised here. No, okay, no, okay. So go to your navbar.js file and fill this section under return with the code that you think is going to give you a navbar. And you can reference the workshop 0 code, but hint, you will need to make some modifications. You can help us. It's been about 2 minutes. Can we get a quick thumbs up, thumbs down to show if you're ready or if you feel like you want a bit more time? Okay, I'll give it another minute. Okay, can we get another thumbs up, thumbs down for whether we're ready to continue or not? So thumbs up if you feel like you're ready with the nav bar. It doesn't have to be really fancy or anything. Can we get some thumbs up? Okay, let's move on. Thanks. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in a nav tag. And I'm just going to type Catbook there. And you might remember from Felina's lecture on Monday that this is pretty much just like a div tag, except it helps with accessibility purposes. And we can go to our website. So what I just did was I just replaced null with a nav tag and the word Catbook, right? That's good. We go to the website, we can see that indeed there are the words Catbook on the upper left corner there, right? And actually one more thing to point out is that whenever we make some change, right, like Catbook 2, and we save it, you can see that there's a new message being generated in the terminal that you are successfully updating, in this case, the navbar.js file. That's just a cool thing, I guess. But let's make changes back to Catbook. Let's take a look at this. So yeah, we do have a navbar there, but it doesn't look that good right now, right? So maybe let's add some styling. And if you remember to add styling here, we need to use class name instead of class because class is reserved for JavaScript functions. So class name. And how we name things is we typically start with the name of the component. This is a navbar component. I'm going to call it navbar, and then a dash, and then the name of the style. So maybe I'll do this for like I'll call this navbar dash container, because this is the container for the navbar. And I'll also have to go to the CSS file and add a navbar dash container. Maybe let's change the background color and go with that blue color. Or maybe let's go with like a different blue color, light blue, let's say. Save the file. You see that it's been updated. Go to the website. And yes, there is indeed a light blue strip up at the top now. Maybe let's do something else. Let's also add a padding here because this navbar is tiny. It's so thin. So let's add padding. Let's make it like, let's see how 20 pixels looks. So 20, does that look better? Maybe let's try 40. Wow, that's a lot bigger. So let's go with 20. And so now we do have a navbar here, right? We can add some style to the text as well, right? So let's create something called navbar text for the text. Actually, we need to go over here and add it in. So this one is going to be called, again, the navbar prefix, because this is the navbar component. And then we're calling this one navbar dash text. Save the file. And let's see, what do we want to do with the text here? Someone just shout out a suggestion for what we want to do. Make it black? Well, it already is black right now, right? But that's a good idea. We can definitely change the color here. So why don't we change the color? Let's see what we can choose. We can make it, let's say, brown, sort of like black, but not quite. Save the file. And I don't know if you can quite see it. Maybe let's go with, like, I don't know, let's do white, even though white probably won't look that good. But, oh, okay, white looks decent. We can also just change the font size. It's kind of small. And thanks for that suggestion, man. So let's do, like, I don't know, 50 pixels. Save it. We can make it bold. Okay, we can make it a different font family too. Let's just go with the first option. So now look, this looks sort of like a programming console a lot more now, right? So yeah, we've edited the CSS file and the JavaScript file for the navbar. Now we do have a navbar. And so this is the very first React component that you've created in a sense, and that's really exciting, right? And let's take a look at the slides. So yes, they went to this is just like an example solution. It's clearly not what I did just now. Go to the CSS file, add in something for, oh, they called it navbar-title, but that's okay. And then go to the JavaScript file and insert your class names there. And now let's make sure that we get everybody caught up with what we've been doing. So if you haven't added a navbar and you want to add a navbar, you can go to your Visual Studio Code and make sure that you've closed any unsaved files. I don't have any unsaved files right now. Make sure that you close any unsaved files and then run in your second terminal window, git space reset space dash dash hard, and then git space checkout space w2 dash step 1, which will get you caught up to where we are right now, which is just the same Catbook that we had last week, basically, with the navbar and React. Are we good with this? Thumbs up, thumbs down. This should be pretty quick. Any sort of problems, raise your hand or go to the help queue. I'll just follow along on this. So git reset dash dash hard, and then git checkout w2 dash step 1. And you can see in this web page here that I now have this standard blue navbar with Catbook in white. Okay, I think we're ready. So let's continue on. And so the exciting thing about this Catbook compared to your Monday Catbook is that we now have this new function called cat happiness. And cat happiness is literally just the text cat happiness above a box with a number in it. And that number increases every single time you click on the image of this corgi here. So we have to think about how we want to store cat happiness. So first off, like, is we store cat happiness as a state, right? Because that's how we store information within components. And the question is, in which component should we store this cat happiness state? Do you want to have people just shout out some quick responses? Our options really are, we can store cat happiness, the state cat happiness in the app component, the navbar component, the profile component, or the cat happiness component. So where will we put this cat happiness state? Really just someone just shout it out. There are 4 options here. Profile, we have anybody who votes for something, anybody for cat happiness, just raise your hands. Should we store the cat happiness state in the cat happiness component? Raise your hands if you think that's a good idea, please, higher. No need to be shy here. Okay, anybody for profile, put your hands down now. Anybody who says we should store the cat happiness states in profile, raise your hand. Okay, a few people, seems to be slightly fewer people. Anybody for navbar or app? Navbar or app? So it turns out that we want to store the cat happiness state in the profile component. And think about why we want to do that, right? So the cat happiness state is something that we modify by clicking on this profile image, right? And we store this profile image in the profile component, right? We can pass states to lower tier components by using props, but we cannot pass states to higher tier components. So whenever we want to use a state, we always want to store it in the highest tier component that we're using that state. Does that sort of make sense? So let's say that I'm talking about a different state here. Maybe also, let's say that I want to display cat happiness in the nav bar, okay? If I want to display cat happiness in the nav bar, I would say that I should store the cat happiness state in the app component, because then I can pass it as a prop to both nav bar component and to the cat happiness component. Does that make sense for everyone here? So we're going to store the cat happiness state in the profile component so that we can update it every single time we click on the profile image. Now let's go ahead and do that. Okay, this is just a tree showing that. So we're storing the cat happiness state, and also I just want to point out like the capitalizations here. So the cat happiness state is in camel case, lowercase c, uppercase h, but we also have a cat happiness component where both the c and the h are capital letters. So we're going to store the cat happiness state in the profile component. We're going to pass it down as a prop, the cat happiness prop, to the capital C, capital H cat happiness component. So how do we add a state to a component? You might remember seeing a line of code earlier, sort of like this. So we're going to use state to designate a variable and to set its value. Feel free to reference weblab.is/react-guide-1 and go ahead and try adding the cat happiness state to your profile. And as the slide says, you do this in your profile.js file. So go to profile.js, and actually let me show you here. So, okay, yeah, there's a helpful comment here that you can insert your cat happiness component and cat happiness header here. Oh, and don't forget to import use state. So I'm going to give people, let's say 3 minutes to do this. So let's try to add the cat happiness state to the profile.js file. And feel free to raise your hand anytime along the way if you want help, or use the help doc or queue. Feel free to raise your hand if you feel like you want some help or anything like that. Can we get a quick thumbs up, down, just to gauge people's reactions on this? Are we ready to go on? We want to go on right now? We want to wait a little bit? Just some quick thumbs up, down. Okay, seems like we want a little bit more time. I'm going to give it 30 seconds and I'm going to ask again if we're ready to move on. Okay, are we ready? Should we move on? Thumbs up, down. Okay, let's move on. So the first thing we want to do actually is, well, you might recognize this import React line, right? If you remember, I just briefly highlighted at the very, I highlighted very briefly that we have an import React line at the very top of our code here. So I'm going to modify this to also add the use state hook. I'm just going to copy this format here. Like that. And now I'm going to add a line to designate our new state variable. I'm going to call this state cat happiness with a lowercase c and an uppercase h. And we're going to first set this, we're going to initialize the value of cat happiness to 0, right? Because initially nobody has clicked on that image. Just watch your spelling here. I'm going to set this to 0. So now we have a state variable. And that's what's being done here. Now we have a state variable. Its value is set to 0. Hope we're all following along here. And that's what's going on in the slides here. Something else that we need to do, though, is we want to use the cat happiness component on the profile page. And if you look at this app.js file here, we use the navbar component, we use the profile component, and we have to import both of these components to this page. So that when we're compiling the codes, the compiler knows where to find the HTML code for these components. Does that make sense? So we need to do something similar here because we want to use the cat happiness component on the profile page, in the profile section. We have to add the cat happiness component. Is everybody following along with that? And so I'm going to import the cat happiness component. Make sure that you watch your spelling here. We don't want the lowercase c, you want the uppercase c because the component has the uppercase. So import cat happiness. And now we need to import it from, where's that cat happiness component stored? It's stored right here, right? Cat happiness.js. And we want to get that file path. So something you can do is you can right click and click copy relative path. That's a handy thing that VS Code lets you do. Or actually what we're going to do instead, though, is we're going to type out the file path. So right now we're in the profile.js file. We can see our file path up here, right? So we're in the pages folder. Everybody agreeing with this? And we want to get to the modules folder. right? You seen that? So how do we go from the pages folder to the modules folder? We have to go up, right? You were pointing up, that's good. So we want to go to the components folder. That's the parent directory, right? And do we remember what the shorthand for the parent directory is? We learned this in the intro to GitHub lecture, also on Monday. To go to the parent directory, we use, shout it out. I think you've got it. 2 dots, that's right. 2 dots, that's great. And then, so now we're in the components folder here. Oh no, we're in the, yes. And now we want to go to the modules folder. So /modules. And now we want to get the cat happiness file. So cathappiness.js. And I'm going to save that. And what this does is this allows us to use the cat happiness component on the profile section. Thumbs up if you're following along with what I just did. And this is in the slides as well. It should. Oh yeah, it's in the slides as well. Is that good? Okay. And then this section that I pointed out earlier, now we want to insert the cat happiness component to this section, right? So we remember how to do that. I'm going to delete that part, and I'm going to remember the cat happiness component is cat with an uppercase C. And I'm actually also going to pass in cat happiness with a lowercase c as a prop. So in this expression here, this is passing in the prop to the cat happiness component. The state variable is this cat happiness here. And this is the prop. And it's sort of confusing because we're calling them both cat happiness. But now we have a state variable, cat happiness, that we're passing in as a prop to the cat happiness component. Is that making sense? And let's save the page and let's go to the website. Okay. Oh, we should go to a Firefox. Oh, okay. So there's an error here actually, and that's good. So I did actually, so oh, I'm missing a bracket. Okay. Okay. Oh. Yeah, got it. Thanks. Got it. Okay. Oh, no, not there either. Yeah. Okay. Oh, wait. Also use parentheses instead of Yep. Thanks. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, well, so what we can see now is that we've added the cat happiness component. And right now the component is just this box here. It's not responsive. When we click the image, nothing happens. And so now what we want to do is we want to add that responsiveness in, right? We want to add that functionality in. Let's go over to the slides and see what we should do now. So, okay, we've added the cat happiness component. It does not look like this yet. So how do we want to add the text cat happiness in? We just add in a header. And now we have cat happiness. Actually, something else I want to show you actually is what happens if we don't import the use state hook here. So this should be broken. I want to go to inspect elements. The console. And it says that use state is not defined. So the website is not loading here because I have not imported useState. And I'm going to undo that and import useState here. Okay, but anyways, so okay. So we have the cat happiness component here. It doesn't look that pretty yet. Let me add a div container so that it gets formatted with Flex, just like the other containers. Let's take a look. So now it's being centered appropriately. The style is still not the same. So I'm just going to copy the style that's being used for the other sections. So save this. Oh. Okay, so I've copied the profile subtitle class that the About Me section has and applied it to the cat happiness section here. And now it's centered appropriately. So let's go back to the slides, and it looks like this now, right? And we also have passed in cat happiness as a prop. So let's see if anything happens when we click on the picture. Nope, nothing happens yet. We still have to apply the cat happiness functionality. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the cat happiness component. And we're going to display the cat happiness prop in the cat happiness component. We're short on time here, so I won't be asking you to do that on your own time here, and I'll just be going ahead and doing this. So first we want to take in props as an input. And now we want to display the counter. So you can see that there's this very handy comment here that says to insert the happiness counter here. I'm going to delete that counter and add in the cat happiness prop. And it's cat happiness with a lowercase c. I'm going to save the page. And let's look over here on the website. So we have a 0 here now because the value of that prop is 0. I'm going to click on the image. Nothing happens yet. We still need to make sure that when we click on the image, that prop value gets updated. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into profile.js. And we're going to implement a function that let's call something like increment cat happiness. And we'll call that function every time we click on the profile image. And that function will increase the value of cat happiness, the state cat happiness, by 1. So let's see here. I believe that the function should have already Oh, actually, sorry, I forgot this. You guys could get caught up with adding the cat happiness prop if you haven't done that yet by closing all of your unsaved files, doing git reset space dash dash hard, and git checkout w2 dash step 2. This will add in the cat happiness prop. So go ahead and do that if you haven't gotten to where we are right now. Okay, so now we are going to add in the function for cat happiness.
Step 2 if you want.
I can,
Easier.
oh,
Step 2 will get the function for you.
okay. Yeah, I should do that too, yeah. So git reset dash dash hard, and then git checkout w2 dash step 2. Oh, I forgot to save the file. Let me close this. Okay, and actually, so you need to do that step because that step is what adds this cat happiness function, increment cat happiness function here. That you can then fill in with what would update your cat happiness. So here, we're going to set cat happiness to be cat happiness +1 whenever we call this function, right? And now we need to make sure that we do call this function every single time we click on the image. So let's find where we put the image in. That's here. And we're going to make it so that every time we click on it, that's the on-click hook, we call the function, which is increment cat happiness. I'm going to save this. Now let's go over to our website. We click on the image, and cat happiness goes up by 1. Are you following along with this? So all I did was add in an increment cat happiness function, and then call a function every single time I click on the image. And so now our website works. So that's it for this workshop. And feel free to look through any of the files. You can also close any unsaved files, do git reset dash dash hard, and then git checkout w2 dash complete to get your complete website that you can also play around with. And actually, okay, this is localhost thing. So you can actually also go over to your package.json file and play with the hot loader command, modify the port number to something like, I don't know, 80, and then rerun hot loader, and then go to localhost :80 and just play around with the code. So I also want to just do a quick recap to add some more interactivity to this talk. So I'm just going to read this, and you can shout out the word that fills in the blank. So we divide our app into components, that's right, and put one in each file. Each component is a function with props as inputs and returns JSX. Each component can store internal updatable private info as state. That's right. That's great. Thanks for shouting that out. State variables. We can use we can use parentheses to enter a JavaScript environment. And then inside the environment, we can use curly braces to create a mini JavaScript environment. And today we also talked about passing in props, reading in props, declaring state variables, and about how React uses class name instead of class for CSS styles. You can find all this information at weblab.is/react-guide-1. And we do have more React lectures coming up later in the day from Kwana and Jackie and also we do have office hours tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We can talk about any sort of React questions you have, async, APIs, and yeah, thanks everyone.